Welcome to Vendetta Sports Media. My name is James Herrick, and today I am doing a film study on UFC welterweight Khamzat Chimaev. Chimaev is currently 11-0, and he is one of the best up-and-coming fighters in the UFC, so I was really excited to break into his film and see what I could find. I found two big strengths that are both very small details, but those small details help him find big-time results, so we're going to analyze how that happens. And when we're done with that, we're going to look at two weaknesses that stood out to me that, his opponents have been able to find success in some areas in the past. And when we're done, we're going to recap those by giving my thoughts on how, he can win fights and what he needs to do to find a victory. But we're also going to look at what his opponents need to do if they would like to beat Khamzat Chimaev. The first strength that we're going to discuss for Khamzat Chimaev is his ability to control his opponent's legs with his legs in grappling scenarios. A lot of people have probably heard of the term hand fighting, but essentially what I like to call this is, kind of leg fighting. He's using his legs to control his opponent's legs. This is very beneficial, and we really see it in three different scenarios for Chimaev. We see it when he's attempting takedowns, we see it when he's looking to control somebody on the ground, and we can see it when he's looking to get hooks so he can get to a position where he can land a submission. Those three things can kind of intertwine at times as well, so those aren't all isolated, but they can work together. But we're going to break into some film and see exactly how he does that. So we start this clip with Chimaev on top, and he's looking to strengthen his position here. He's able to do that by going for an ankle ride. He takes his right leg, scoops Li Jingliang's left leg, and sits back. That makes it so much harder for Jingliang to stand up out of this position. To counteract this, Li Jingliang posts up to create some separation, but when he does, Khamzat Chimaev just has to go from ankle ride to switch over to his left leg where he can get a hook in. Once he's got that hook in, he's in a much better position to chase submissions. In this clip against Gilbert Burns, the second Khamzat Chimaev is able to land this takedown, he immediately looks to go back to that ankle ride. However, Gilbert Burns is a very good grappler, and he notices that, so he makes an instant attempt to free his leg. When he does, Khamzat Chimaev is able to counter that by bringing in his own heel, which blocks Gilbert's exit and keeps him in that ankle ride. So this ability for Khamzat Chimaev to control his opponent's lower half really goes a long way in helping him find submission victories. If you're listening to the narratives, it's broadly going to be said that Khamzat Chimaev is the type of guy that'll come, pick you up, slam you, and submit you. But in all honesty, his grappling's a little bit more methodical. Well, he is very, very effective, so it looks like it's quick and easy. There's a little bit more methodical, and I think, it's not as simple as everyone makes it out to be. And it starts with that control of his opponent's lower half. So we're going to look at how he was able to control Li Jingliang's lower half and how that led to him getting a submission finish. Once Chimaev has this position controlled, he starts working towards a finish. He does this by locking his hands around Jingliang's waist and pulling him off the fence. From there, he rotates around and gets that hook in on the opposite side. Then it's very quick and easy for him to get a second hook in, and with that, he eventually finishes the fight with a rear naked choke. The second strength that really stood out to me in Khamzat Chimaev's game was his ability to control the cage. Now, what this means is it means that Khamzat Chimaev is pushing his opponent back up against the fence. So if you watch his film, there's a lot of times where his opponent is in between that black line on the octagon and in between the fence. Basically, that means they didn't really have a lot of room to move, and Khamzat Chimaev is great at getting his opponents in that position and keeping them there. Against Gilbert Burns, Khamzat Chimaev depended on taking the center of the octagon. Even when the fight first started, he immediately walks Gilbert down and throws two teeps, and both of those push Gilbert back up against the fence. This clip here really shows you how much effort Chimaev puts in controlling the center of the octagon. Here we see Burns do a really good job of escaping, retaking the center, but Chimaev immediately meets that with pressure that pushes Burns back again. Khamzat Chimaev's ability to push his opponents up against the cage really helps him land strikes. He's not some tremendous striker, but when he gets you backed up to the cage, he can do a lot more work with his strikes. If you just think about two guys striking in the center of the octagon, The person that's defensive can move backwards, or they can move left, or they can move right, and they can move just about every angle in between that to evade a strike. However, when an opponent is pushed back up against the cage, they can then only move left or right to evade a strike. So by Chimaev backing his opponents up, he's really limiting their angles that they have to avoid strikes, and that gives him more opportunities to land power strikes. In those scenarios, opponents also have to kind of close their stance off so they can move laterally a little bit more. They have to be more square so they can try and get their back off the fence. And when those two things are happening, Khamzat Chimaev becomes a lot more effective at landing power strikes, and that is exactly how he was able to get a knockdown against Gilbert Burns, and that is how he was able to get his knockout against Gerald Meerschaert. Against Meerschaert, we see Chimaev take the center very quickly. He's pushing Meerschaert back, and he throws a teep to get Meerschaert all the way back to the fence. Once Meerschaert's in this position, he really gets very lateral, and he starts to try and circle out. But Chimaev immediately chases him, stays in his face, and the second Meerschaert stops moving, Chimaev lets this right hand go that connects right on the button, and he wins by knockout. So in this example against Gilbert Burns, Chimaev throws a kick that backs Burns up. From there, Burns starts moving out to his right, but he's moving at the same exact pace, kind of slow, but he's just methodically moving. Chimaev is able to time that, and he throws a jab that connects very, very hard, and this was all because he was able to time Burns' movement because he's circling in the same direction out to the right. Now, we're moving over to the weaknesses now, and this section's a little bit more difficult because Khamzat Chimaev is not some flaw-filled fighter, so you kind of have to be a little bit more selective and a little bit more nitpicky when you're looking at some weaknesses here. And the first weakness that I noticed was that he really gets hit with leg kicks quite often. This isn't something that I particularly like to see. I think it's better to not absorb leg kicks, but for Khamzat Chimaev, he gets hit fairly often with leg kicks, and his opponents land them at a fairly high percentage. It doesn't really look like he attempts to counter them, attempts to check them. Rarely does he try and get out of the way of them. So I think that is one weakness that Gilbert Burns was able to display very well. These clips are all going to be fairly simple because this isn't super technical, but in this first one, we see Khamzat Chimaev not really do much to defend against this leg kick, and he gets absolutely smoked by it. Then we see Burns throw two back-to-back leg kicks, and both land. In this last clip, we see Chimaev standing pretty flat-footed, and Burns throws a pretty tame leg kick out there, and it still lands very well. And then the second weakness that I noticed from Khamzat Chimaev was that he can get countered. And this is the second time I'm talking about counters in a film study. I also talked about them in my film study on Kamaru Usman. Now, this is kind of a common trait amongst wrestlers. If you think about a wrestler trying to become a more advanced striker, usually you don't go to counter striking right away. That's a skill that comes later on in more advanced striking. So it's really not that terrible of a thing to see at this stage of his career, but I think it is a weakness at the moment. And the first way that he really gets countered is when he's throwing a lot of punches consecutively. Opponents can sit down on a shot and get off a really good counter. Once again, Gilbert Burns was able to display that in their most recent fight. In this first clip, Chimaev is trying to throw his jab uppercut combo, which he throws frequently, but Burns sees that jab coming, he gets his head off the center line, and he connects with a counter hook that lands well. This time, Chimaev throws a left straight, and he leaves it out there a little bit too long, which allows Gilbert to return with a right hand of his own, and he connects. In this last clip, Khamzat Chimaev lands a really good uppercut, but once he does, he kind of, starts getting in this zone where he's just throwing a flurry of strikes, and in that flurry, Gilbert Burns sits down on an overhand right that hurts Khamzat Chimaev very badly. This is right before that strike lands. I want you to look at two things. The head of Khamzat Chimaev is right on the center line. Look at Gilbert Burns' head. It's off the center line. He's not going to get hit. Chimaev, no head movement, stays on the center line. At the same time, his left hand is coming back from throwing that strike, while his right hand attempts to throw an uppercut. Neither is defending himself. Chimaev getting countered is not limited to him exchanging with somebody in the pocket. It can also arise when he's throwing leg kicks. Chimaev does have some very Chimaev's Chimaev's issue of getting countered also arises when he's throwing leg kicks. Now, he has really good leg kicks, but I think he can get a little predictable with his timing, and it kind of allows his opponents to counter him. Gilbert Burns did a really good job of finding some counter strikes off of the leg kicks that Chimaev was throwing. And before we get into these clips, I'd like to also remind you that Gilbert Burns is much smaller than Khamzat Chimaev. Chimaev's fought at 185 in the past, and Gilbert Burns has fought at 155. So he's landed a couple good, really good counters off of leg kicks, but also if Gilbert Burns was a little bit bigger and a little bit longer, I think these strikes would have been a little bit more successful, but we're going to still highlight the issues that Khamzat Chimaev displayed while throwing some leg kicks. Here we see Gilbert Burns get the timing of Khamzat Chimaev down to the point where Chimaev's in the middle of throwing this kick, and while he's got one foot in the air, Gilbert's able to return with an overhand right that he catches Chimaev with. In this one, Gilbert Burns has the timing down again. This time, instead of throwing an overhand, he steps into the kick and he throws a jab instead. Now that we've got some strengths and weaknesses out on the table, let's look at the keys to victory for Khamzat Chimaev. For Chimaev, I think it's fairly simple. Get your wrestling going, right? He can strike with guys, but in most fights, he's going to have a big advantage on the ground. There's no reason he shouldn't try and go out there and take people down and submit them like he's been able to do in a lot of his fights. He should continue that. That's what he's good at. Now, if he does elect to strike with somebody, he needs to control the cage. As I already mentioned, I already showed you why that's important, but that is something that he needs to continue to do, and he shouldn't really deviate from that because it helps him so much in landing those very powerful strikes, and it helps him win a lot of striking exchanges that would probably be more 50-50 or swing in his opponent's favor if, they weren't backed up. And then when he's throwing strikes, I like it when he stays simple. I like it when he throws his jab. I like it when he throws his straight right. He's got some good hooks. He has a very good counter straight as well. I think that's something very, one of his more underrated strikes. But I think he should stick to those more simpler collection of strikes because there's no reason for him to get advanced. The more advanced he gets with his striking, the more wild he gets and the more opportunities he leaves for his opponents to counter him. So I think he should stay relatively simple while he's striking. When looking for ways to beat Khamzat Chimaev, it's not as easy as looking for ways for Khamzat Chimaev to win. However, I think there are some things that you can do. Most importantly, you can't really let him grapple you, which is very, very difficult. But I think a good way to avoid the grappling exchanges is by threatening with submissions. If you look at that fight with Gilbert Burns did much better than most people in defending against his wrestling because he used his jiu-jitsu. So I think if fighters in the future can use their jiu-jitsu, and even if it's something like threatening an armbar or threatening a guillotine to the point where Khamzat Chimaev has to give them the space to where you can stand up. You don't have to submit him, but just threaten these Brazilian jiu-jitsu moves, threaten some good BJJ, and try and get him to, move away from the grappling and kind of deviate his game plan. I think that is one very, very effective thing you can do. And then, opposite of the strengths, obviously, don't let him control you up against the cage. If your back's up against the cage, he's infinitely better in his striking. So work on your footwork and work on keeping your back off the fence. Also, throw the leg kicks. If he doesn't want to check them, hit him with the 150 leg kicks. Try and get his leg damaged. If his leg's damaged, him walking you down isn't going to be as easy. He's not going to be able to go out there and wrestle you as well if one of his legs is busted up. So try and bust up one of his legs and really cause some damage to that limb and see if you can pull away because he is not effective at his game since he didn't want to check the leg kick. Lastly, he kind of got tired a little bit in his fight with Gilbert Burns, right? He slowed a little bit, and Gilbert really didn't do much for body work. So I think throwing some body shots would be very beneficial, whether it's knees in the clinch, whether it's, a jab to the body, whether it's some short body work, some short hooks, just somehow work in some body shots, kicks to the body even, anything really. Kicks can be risky because he can take you down, but regardless, however you want to do it, I think attacking the body and seeing if he will slow down in the second, third, fourth round, I think those are all very beneficial, and I think that is something that you should try. Thank you so much for watching this film study on Khamzat Chimaev. Make sure you subscribe to the Vendetta Sports Media YouTube page, and make sure you go to vendettasportsmedia.com and check out the variety of content and the variety of articles that you can find from the website. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.